Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Pauline Vorms, the co-founder and CEO of the Polkadot Blockchain Academy. And I'm personally so pleased to see so many familiar faces, PBA alumni, faculty, and supporters. For this session, the future of truth on the internet, we're bringing together people working at the intersection of journalism, community, and Web3. We've gathered voices who know firsthand, in a real-life use case, what it takes to protect independent media and public interest information. And we are going to explore together how decentralized technology can give journalism more sustainable models and real ownership about its infrastructure. Most conversations about independent journalism focus on content. This one is about capital and control, how independent media pays for itself, and who owns the pipes it runs on. And for this conversation, I'm honored to be joined by our panelists today. First, Luzmeli Reyes, co-founder of Efecto Cucuyo, Venezuela's leading independent news outlet, CPJ Press Freedom Award winner, and columnist for El País España. A journalist who didn't choose Web3, but was pushed there by a government that controls the money, the interest, and the press. Welcome, Luzmeli. I'm here also with José Luis Peñarredonda, journalist and researchers at CLIPS, Latin America's premier cross-border investigative network, specializing in one thing that makes all of this harder, disinformation, and the platforms that let it win. Welcome, José Luis.
Thank you.
And finally, we're here with Carlos Aguiló, tech advisors of Efecto Cucuyo, PBA alumni, and builder in the Polkadot ecosystem. The person who saw that independent journalism doesn't just have a censorship problem, it also has an infrastructure problem, and got us here together to try to solve it.
Thank you.
So let's welcome to our panelists. Now, let's get into it. The question today isn't whether Web3 is the future of media. It's whether it can help independent newsrooms finally own their own funding and their own distribution. And we'll first go to a segment about the sustainability problem. Luzmeli, what does financial fragility actually feel inside an independent news outlet?
We had many layers of the fragility. We always say there is not only a problem with the funding, we have dealing in an hostile and in an authoritarian country, so we had to deal with the risk that somebody take us or the police go to my homes and this kind of things that is inherent, you know, to living and doing journalism in an authoritarian country. There is another fragility that I identify also, which is the way that the organized crime is working. It's not only authoritarian in other countries. We have some journalists that they were killed by the organized crime. And there is a third fragility that there is our independent sites rely on a technological platform that we don't control. We don't manage them, and we have to respond to the rules of that platform, as X or Facebook or Instagram, and then we produce the contents, but we don't manage really the way that the people is going to watch or to have that content.
Thank you. José Luis, from a business perspective, why have the dominant digital media, like Luzmeli mentioned, failed independent outlets? And what pattern have you seen in your investigations?
Well, we've seen that when digital media tend to go to the social media game, they go to the platforms, they share the data with them, they incentivize their users, their readers, to share the data with these platforms, they are sometimes going against their own coverage, going against their own things they're trying to denounce, they're trying to say out loud. We have investigated things like ad networks, have investigated things like scams and stuff like that, and then you have to go and post your investigations in the same places where these scams happen. This is at least crazy. And the other part is that the business model that arises from decentralized infrastructure sometimes hinder the quality of the journalism itself, sometimes creates incentives against making good journalism. If your incentive is to create a large audience, then some outlets, sadly, are going to start doing tricks, are going to start to do things like clickbait, like doing this kind of, trying to attract the largest amount possible of people with not great journalism. And that might be good for the business in the short term, but in the end, it kills what matters most, which is your credibility.
Thank you. Carlos, building on that, can you please walk us through the notion of collective capital? And how does it change about the business model, and why does it need an alliance and not just a tool?
Yeah, so one of the things we lived when having Cocuyo born back in 2014 was having to be, journalists become now entrepreneurs, and they become business owners, they become responsible for everything regarding a regular business, right? And the grantees and the fund creators, they don't have the rules of the funding created for authoritarian countries. So in many times, we have to be an exception of the rule. We have to be like the exception of the exception to be able to get the funds, because transparency and compliance was very hard. So in many senses, we had to learn how to collectively work with other journalists to be able to justify our existence, right? So when we're talking about collective capital and the need for this new alliance, we see the same dilemma. Like, journalists now have to be able to come together, and the alliance comes with a responsibility. It's actually, how are you going to manage the funds? Where are you going to do with that? Well, it's the governance model. And I think Web3 ecosystem has a lot of experimentation regarding governance models and decentralized governance models, and we're here to try to bridge those experiences to our world.
Exactly. So as we are saying, advertising is weak. Grants models are often broken, especially in repressive governments. Government money is obviously compromised in many places. So what are we left with? And here is the assumption in bringing our next segment about owning the infrastructure and the distribution for journalism. Let's start with a question for you, José Luis. You mentioned already the big platforms, the big social media mainstream platforms. When your audience live on the platforms you don't control, what happened to truth? What happened to reach and resilience against disinformation?
If the trust you create with your audiences depends on the fact that your Instagram profile for saying something is live, whenever the Instagram profile falls for some reason, maybe a moderation problem, maybe an attack, maybe a whim from Meta, your trust is gone. You have to rebuild it from scratch again. And that's a terrible thing to do when you have years of work wasted. And the other thing is, when media outlets participate again in these social media dynamics, and they have to compete with the dogs, with the football, with the scams, with this information, then they are creating incentives for people to participate in the same algorithmic motivations, in the same dynamics, in the same attention economy, misgivances or informations that make this information thrive. So basically, in a way that perhaps media can't avoid so far, haven't been able to avoid so far, they are fueling in some way the same machines that fuel misinformation.
Thank you. Luz Meli, can you tell us a bit about what's the real price of platform dependency? Thinking especially about deplatforming, throttling, surveillance.
I had to say something. You see that I take my glasses in order to listen to her. This is crazy, no? Nobody do that, but I did that. It's because I try to understand not only the question, literally, but the audience that we are right now. In 2015, Efecto Cocuyo, which I didn't explain at the beginning of this conversation what that means. Efecto Cocuyo means, in English, firefly effect. And the reason of that name is that we develop a connection with communities, and our first action was looking for funds on the street, asking to the people for funds, and we used Twitter. Do you remember Twitter? Well, I use Twitter. Now it's X, and we rely in this kind of. We found that going to social media was a way to fight against censorship. 11 years later, we had found that sometimes the rules or the governance of this platform are working against the independence of journalism, but also they are working against the truth. So for us, dealing with this kind of tension that we were talking about is very complicated, because we try to use the platform that we have access, but we know that we don't have freedom in that kind of platform.
Thank you. And Carlos, can you tell us now, from your point of view, what does it mean concretely for a newsroom to own their own infrastructure and distribution?
Well, that's a big question, right? And I think we're still answering, and these events help us create that pathway. But as Luzmeli was saying, like we launched in 2014, and with the whole social media conversation was, you're going to own your channel. You're going to be able to have your engagement directly with your audience. That's peer-to-peer, they say, in that time. That you're going to have peer-to-peer conversations. And then you're going to be able to monetize your audiences, right? And then you're going to be able to live from a sustainable journalism. Well, as Luzmeli said, 11 years have passed, and we are deep in that dependency, right? So owning the infrastructure right now, and the distribution model, and we built and we showcased that in a small workshop we had where we worked with Parity, building a demo app that's in the network, in the Firefly network. You can search it in the app, and well, new dilemmas arise since you are the real owner of the platform. So, what are the rules of engagement of the platform? If the algorithms are not controlled by the big tech and you have to create the incentives for participation, there's, well, some rules that have to be designed, and journalists have to go deeper in the conversation to be able to design it and understand it. And I think the big open question is regarding governance, because again, we go back to the alliance. What is an independent journalist? Who does independent journalism and who doesn't? What is a news and independent outlet? What is the multiculturality of journalism, also how you manage that from different religions, different cultures? So this kind of dilemmas, I think, are very interesting, and I think it's part of the journalists on their side to have to create new answers for that.
Exactly. Thank you. So here we just saw for the group here, the goal is not really to put journalism on chain. Again, it's not a content conversation. It's not bringing that whole industry on chain. It's really about putting the trust and the distribution infrastructure in the hands of the people who would really depend on it. And from that part, it brings us to talking about community support to this collective capital. As Carlos defined earlier, when we talk about collective capital, we talk about pooled financial support from a community structured to generate durable resources for a shared mission over, we hope, a long time. José Luis, what turns audience support into actually audience participation that would be durable?
An awful lot of work. Yeah, I mean, what happens is that most people won't do anything other than consuming your work. A few of them will cheer for you, and a very, very, very little subset of this whole mess is going to actually do something for you. And then on the one hand, you can tackle that by a numbers game. Go and have a lot of reach, and then some of them will trickle down. That's one strategy. That's valid. The other one is creating trust. I get back to the trust thing because that's the one main feature I've been finding in these Web3 conversations that really touches with journalism. The more people trust you, the more they will be willing to do things for you. The most stake you give them in what you do as a media, as a journalist every day, the more they will be willing to give back to you in some form. Maybe work, maybe money, maybe knowledge. And then, of course, over all these trust relationships, there are the trust infrastructures. And that's the open question we've been circling around this in this conversation, which is, in whom can we rely to build these infrastructures?
Thank you. And so, going from there, Carlos, how do transparent funding would flow? How do programmable payouts and participation credentials, and what we defined before, shared treasuries, would change the economics, but without having the newsroom lose control and editorial control?
That's another very wide question, but I think it's important to understand how the model fails also, because we've tried everything. And when I say everything, it's obviously grants, subscription model, membership models, crowdfunding, crowd investment, NFTs. I mean, we've tried it all. And it still didn't solve the underlying structure or structural problem of sustainability. So it's a very simple idea that we want to bring to the table and try to flip the coin. We know, because we receive funds from the big funders and grantees, that they source their funds from philanthropic funds, from this big, related to this big corps or these big structures, and they use that to help the journalists, let's say, in Latin American network, right? So we have managed those funds. So we want to flip the coin, and we want to own the platform, right? So why would we then spend the funds that we receive? And that is what we've been doing. Every dollar that comes in comes out. Every fund that we get, we do great journalism, and we are run out of funds, right? And now we have a very political crisis, and there are no more funds. So now journalists have to sustain their own funds. With their own funds, the outlets, they have to do the work, and they also have to look for more funds, right? So let's try to learn some good from this maybe capitalist perspective, and let's become ourselves the fund owners. And that principle is where all of this technology can be very, very useful, because if we're able just to collectively say, okay, let's put the funds here, and instead of just spending the funds, let's invest those funds, let's stake those funds, let's get some earnings from those funds, and then use those earnings in a sustainable way to finance the outlets. It's a very basic principle, but it takes us to a very different position in the future, and hopefully all that tech will help us distribute the funds, manage the funds, and work in that sense.
Definitely. Luz Meli, when you hear Carlos talk about a shared treasury fund, what do you think of? What are the things that individual outlets today cannot afford alone and are scrambling to find funding for, or are just giving up on, that a shared treasury fund could help with? I'm thinking about legal defense, fact-checking, pools, etc. What do you think, especially in your context, of an ecosystem that has to fight against coordinated disinformation in a hostile environment? What would a shared treasury fund bring?
I'm going to ask you, do you want to hear the truth, what I really think, or the wishing? Well, I think the problem is not a problem of funding right now, because we had spent 11 years, 15 years, there are a lot of experimentation about how to do with the journalism, how to fight disinformation, how to pay lawyers to defend us from the attack of the government. So right now, for me, if you gave me $10 million, which I would really appreciate that, if somebody give me that money is we are going to spend the money during the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So for me, the problem is the model. And something that I try to ask to people here in this different audience, because it's my first time talking to people who manage technology. I don't know casi nada, anything about technology, but I know how to do journalism, and I know how to do a good media journalism. So right now, for me, the challenge is find or make an experiment with a different model of media enterprise, independent media enterprise, especially in our environment. Because as I said before, the money is going, if you don't change the model, you are going to spend all the money, and in 3 years, next 3 years, next 5 years, I'm gonna sit down here telling you, okay, you know, the $10 million that I found, I crowdfund in 2026, we spend that. So for me, the problem is the model that we have to look for and how the technology can help us to find or to explore another model.
Thank you, Luz Meli. Now we're going to shake things up a little bit and change the format. And we're going into exploring in a rapid-fire mode, explore some hard tensions that we've been walking around a little bit in this discussion. So I'm going to give you some tension and ask each of you to answer in less than 60 seconds. We're going to start, Luz Meli, with the tension between participation and editorial independence.
We have to find all of the life for editorial independence. And I really, really appreciate the participation. And I really appreciate that because it's our model to ask or to create a crowdsourcing model. But I think that sometimes you have to have the expert approach about some issue, because not always the communities, or not always the people or people who is supporting you, they can take a good decision. And I'm gonna try to put an example.
60 seconds.
Huh? Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
I'm just
gonna
kidding.
put an example. When you go to vote, for example, you can't vote because you have the right to vote for one person, but it doesn't mean that the person that the majority select is the right person for the country or for the society, so even for the journalists.
Now, moving on to José Luis, transparency versus journalist safety in authoritarian context.
Well, we have a saying in Latin America, no story is worth a life. So, of course, you want to be as transparent as you can afford, but there are things that you cannot tell the people because you have to protect your source, you have to protect someone else's life, someone else's livelihood. I think, again, I get back to trust, because you have to be able to explain your audience that. I won't tell you this part of the story because someone else is at risk. And sometimes you won't be able to tell them that you cannot tell them, that you have to hide it entirely. So in the end, they will have to trust you even when you cannot tell them the full truth.
Moving on to Carlos, owning distribution versus reaching mainstream audiences.
Ooh, well, that's a good tension, and we learned this right from the first days with the journalists. Journalists goes where the story is, and they have to spread the story to the wider audiences as possible. So when we're talking about in the Web3 environment, some maximalism thought, sometimes that ideology is against distribution. And it's a dichotomy. So we need a 2.5, I think, approach, Web 2.5 approach, where we need to be there where the audiences are, but we need to own the distribution and the content generation.
I'd love to hear your views also, Luz Meli, on this one. Owning distribution versus reaching the mainstream audiences.
20 seconds?
Yeah.
I believe very, in a very strong way in the niche product contents. So I don't believe in the mainstream because my position right now is fighting with some mainstream media.
Thank you. And we're going to close this segment with José Luis on the tension between community ownership versus the capture by political actors or disinformation networks.
You have to be able to trust your community. Once again, I keep coming back to trust because you want a community that cannot be captured easily by an external actor. We've seen things like astroturfing, in which something that seems community-based or organic is actually owned and the strings are being put by someone else, by some actor. So you want to be able, again, to have a trust infrastructure that you can, that the community that is talking to you, that you have an everyday relationship with, is really a community that works for your best interest.
Thank you. As we've seen here with this nuance around trust, we want the community to help govern the sustainability model and contribute, as well as the infrastructure, but it should not govern the newsroom itself. Thank you for those tensions that we've been dealing with and that we're still exploring, as we're trying to see a model that cannot survive those tensions is not actually ready for journalism. Now, in our last segment, we're going to close this discussion. And I would like to ask each of you to have a word for our audience and to share what would you like the room to do. This is your opportunity to invite our audience to contribute to this topic, to join us. And it's your opportunity to address them and tell them if they are interested, how can they help and what do you wish for them to do?
I would love developers to understand what does trust mean in a journalistic setting and to try to design an infrastructure that helps us create that and make it more widespread among society. People are starting to hate journalists all over the world, and I believe tech can help a bit on at least putting the thing out there and putting the information out there and putting the process of journalism out there and putting the source of trust, which is the information, the verification, the evidence out there in a way that is safe and is trustworthy.
Rosemary, if you have the opportunity to tell, what would you like this room to do right after this panel?
I thought that all of my life I was working and fighting for independence journalism, and I was chat with somebody who is here in the audience, Marina, and I realized that what I need or what I'm going to fight is how to how to find a way to be soberano. In Spanish, it's soberano. In English, it's a very complicated
Sovereignty.
word. Sovereignty. So for me, the quest right now is how we are going to look for the independent sovereignty in journalism, not only independence journalism.
Yes, thank you. Carlos, your closing words.
So yes, we're here with a hope, maybe, that is creating this alliance, inspired by the fireflies. We can all become fireflies of our own. So the Cocuyo Alliance is an initiative that started here in this Web3 Summit, and it's seeking to join artists, developers, journalists, funders, grantees, educators, to help us build this model, basically. So we're, I think, entering a stage of creating the model, designing the model. We actually have some great tech. We have Sean there in the audience that built a specific, beautiful demo to start the technical conversation. But it's not the only thing that we need. We need the multi-voices joining the alliance. So please join our Cocuyo Alliance and help us build this conversation and this new model.
Thank you very much. Can we get the slide up?
Yeah, I think there was a hashtag
interested
there.
in joining this upcoming alliance. And we're going to close now. We've seen that independent journalism has survived dictatorship and oppressive regimes. It's surviving deplatforming or platform collapses and funding crises. But today it has to fight all of those issues at once. And that's why we are here now, and that's why we are inviting all of you to join this initiative and contribute. Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists,
Thank
you. Thanks a
Jose
lot.
Luis,
Thank you for having us.
Ismael, and Carlos. Thank you.
Yeah.